The reason you're drawn to somebody does have something to do with the microorganisms living on your body. Skincare, industrialized skincare really decimates the microbiome. There are so many little ways like that the beauty industry is at odds with just what the human body is meant to do.
Hello, Jessica.
Hello.
Welcome to the How the Light Gets In Festival.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're very welcome. How are you doing?
I'm doing great.
Good. So this interview is about the beauty industry, obviously. So I think we'll just get right into it.
Let's go.
So how can you have beauty without the beauty industry?
I think a better question is, how can you have beauty within the beauty industry? I just feel like what the beauty industry sells and sort of like a more philosophical concept of beauty are so at odds with each other that I think it is really important to start to like disentangle them and maybe stop referring to what the industry sells as beauty and maybe start referring to it as physical appearance, which is a very different thing. Beauty, multidimensional, energetic, like inherent human longing, appearance, one-dimensional, easily like bought and changed. There's a world of difference.
And how can we start understanding that difference now? What can we be doing to understand that difference?
I mean, I think the first thing is just language. Like, I'm a really firm believer in the power of language and changing the way that we talk about things. So like a great first step is saying appearance when you mean appearance, saying beauty when you mean beauty. I think also really helpful is learning the history of the beauty industry and beauty standards and seeing some of the very ugly systems that our current standards stem from. Knowing where, a particular beauty standard originates makes it less appealing and makes it seem less like beauty. Even understanding the science of some of these beauty standards and the products and how they affect the human body, the human psyche, and the planet makes them seem farther and farther away from beauty. So just understanding like the health risks that are involved, the psychological risks that are involved with beauty standards, which, perpetuate anxiety, depression, dysmorphia, self-harm, and then the environmental impact of the, immense consumerism promoted by the beauty industry. It's just, can you call something beautiful when it's, partially responsible for the destruction of the planet and life forms and biodiversity? I don't think so. So I think just being really clear about all of those things helps start to like disentangle those concepts.
Yeah, it seems like an oxymoron, doesn't it? When you have sort of beauty industry and you also have planet destroying industry as well.
Exactly. Yeah, I think it really makes you question like what is the supposed beauty you're valuing and why would that be beauty to you?
So what is beauty to you? And like how can we get to that? Through this mess that we have at the moment? Like, how can we get to that?
I think beauty to me is an experience that you have outside of yourself. And the beauty industry is primarily is focusing back in on your own self and your own appearance. I hesitate to even say focusing on yourself because you're not focusing on the self. It's focused merely on like the body and modifying the body to meet the standard of the day. So I think a big part of what beauty is to me is like nature and animals and like the river behind us. I can't stop staring at it. Like that's beauty. That's like majesty that like incites this sort of feeling. It inspires you. I mean, I'm reading Elaine Scarry on Beauty and Being Just, rereading it, and she talks about how beauty inspires replication, and that feels very true to me. But replication in terms of like a song, a drawing, you want to photograph it, you want to share it with your friends, and yeah, that really rings true to me right now.
Yeah, beauty is more of an artistic form as well.
Exactly. And I think that's part of where the divide between beauty and the beauty industry comes in too. It's like, it's sort of a cliche to be like, can art also be commerce? Can it also be commercial? Can you sell it? Like, of course, that's like an enduring debate, but I think it's just as valid when it comes to beauty. Like, is mass production part of art and beauty?
It's a good question. I don't know.
I say no, although I don't have a compelling argument for that right now. It just feels like
inherently
truth.
It feels like a contrast there. That,
exactly.
Yeah. So what you're saying, it seems to also be a sort of difference of collectivism versus individualism. So beauty to you is a collective thing as well. And like
100%.
how is that as well? How can we become more attuned to that collectivism within beauty, do you think?
I think that's such a great question, and it's something I think about a lot in terms of beauty standards, because obviously beauty standards are passed down through these like huge systems, but they affect us collectively, they're created collectively, and the more people who buy into them, the more the standard is reinforced. And I think it's a really beautiful illustration of like the power of the collective when we look at how for instance, say a celebrity is getting Botox as they were 15 years ago. It was like mainly for celebrities. That we had, I mean, I hesitate to say a healthier relationship with beauty, but there was sort of this divide of that's a standard for celebrities and me and my friends are over here and we're not necessarily expected to look like that in every day. Now with the democratization of what is possible in beauty, with the acceleration of the technology that's available, the products that are available, the injectables and procedures that are available, they even have like buy now, pay later for cosmetic surgery now. So it really is available to the masses, and we see how that's compounded the pressure for everyone to sort of conform, because that's now a standard that's not expected from the celebrity, but from like your college roommate or your sister. I mean, my youngest sister has said to me, like, her roommate started getting lip fillers and she had never cared about her own lips before, but now she's like, I think I need lip filler. And it really just shows the power like one person can have within their own community, whether buying in or divesting. And I personally would love to see that like collective power turned out the opposite way toward divesting from beauty, because it really does have a ripple effect in like our real lives and our real communities.
Yeah, so divesting from beauty is obviously, I think, quite important for us, because there is that pressure consistently in our everyday lives to be something that we're not. Like how do we go about that though, when we have that collective pressure to buy into it? Is it sort of strong individuals who are like, well, I don't have to do that? Like, it feels a bit like that sometimes.
Yeah.
So how do we do that?
I think, there are varying degrees of who is going to feel comfortable divesting, who is ready for the challenge of divesting, and who like has the privilege of divesting, because I do want to acknowledge that beauty standards affect different groups of people in different ways. For example, a woman of color is held to a very specific beauty standard that will impact her career, her social relationships, how she's treated politically in a very different way than, a white woman who fits the typical Eurocentric beauty standard. So I do challenge those who are inherently closer to the standard of beauty to do everything they can to divest, because they can without as much consequence. And again, in doing that I sort of refer to it as aesthetic inflation. The more people who buy into the beauty standard, the more normalized it is, the more it becomes the baseline politically for how women specifically are valued and devalued. So the fewer people we buy in, we sort of get that deflation going on, and it does benefit everyone eventually. I think also a really important thing is starting out by reframing some of our beauty behaviors as what I like to say is cosmetic coping mechanisms. The things that we often change about ourselves are a way of coping with a world that, again, values and devalues us based on what we look like. And these can be very effective coping mechanisms, but it's important to, admit that they're individual coping mechanisms that are ultimately compounding the problem for you and for everyone else. And so just like any other coping mechanism, it's not like healthy or realistic to be like, I'm gonna stop cold turkey. We have to start exploring other ways of coping with beauty culture. And some of that will involve like mental and emotional work. Some of that will involve political work, consciousness raising. There are many ways to get into it, but I think it starts with reframing what we're doing as not like individual empowerment, but like coping with a culture that is really toxic.
Yeah, and obviously in your Substack, you are often open about criticizing celebrities that are pushing for sort of this cosmetic enhancement of ourselves.
Yeah.
And do you see that then as it's on them primarily to take the hold for this a little bit and actually push back against it as well?
Yes, I think that's very powerful. I mean, the way that I see beauty standards working or being passed down is sort of like in the form of a multi-level marketing scheme, I like to say, in MLM. Like, they start at the top. Like, the top would be these huge systems like white supremacy, patriarchy, colonialism, capitalism. That's where these standards start, right? The next level underneath is the industry. We're mass producing products that help us adhere to these standards. We're seeding new standards. On that level would be celebrities who are, you know, advertising the standards and encouraging people, especially when they launch their own beauty brands, to adhere to the standards as well. So I think the further up the chain somebody is in that, the more impactful it will be if and when they divest. So yeah, of course, I think celebrities should be held accountable for the power that they have, and should do something useful with that power.
Yeah.
And
you're trying to make it happen in your Substack.
Yes, I'm trying. I'm trying.
So you mentioned sort of colonialism and a colonial history of beauty. Can you go into that a bit more? So what's occurring there, and why is it so important?
Right. So colonialism and beauty standards starts out when a dominant group invades the land of the non-dominant group, takes over, takes control, instills the values of that dominant group in the non-dominant group, exploits and extracts them for their own benefit, right? Mm-hmm. So, for example, we can see this in colonized lands that were colonized by white settlers, white colonizers. They instill a standard of beauty. The closer you are to white skin, the more powerful you are. We see this even come up in like slavery, where light-skinned slaves were in the house, were treated a little bit better, had certain privileges, because the closer you are to that dominant ideal, the better your treatment will be. That inspires inspires the colonized peoples to have like this incentive to try to appeal to the dominant beauty standard, often to their own detriment. I'm thinking of the skin whitening industry, which is like an $8 billion industry still. I feel like we don't see its effects as much in the US or the UK, but globally, skin lightening is really damaging, not only to the psyches of young Black girls, but also to their skin. There's a lot of like very serious health effects that come with it. And that's a really, I think, still prominent example of cosmetic colonialism that we see today.
I didn't realize it was $8 billion.
It's so
industry.
much bigger than you think, because, I mean, I don't know about the UK, but in the US, there are certain things that you're like not allowed to say, not allowed to sell, certain ingredients that, you know, are just kind of under the table. You'll find them in like counterfeiters and things like that, but not in the mainstream beauty industry. But if you look at billboards, for instance, in Africa or India, it's still very normal to say you should look whiter and here's how to do it.
Yeah. So I was listening to a podcast you did, I think, and you were saying that beauty is inherently radical. So why is beauty radical to you?
I think, I mean, for a similar reason as what I said before, is it's an experience that takes you outside of yourself and connects you to something bigger and something greater. I think beauty can impart a sort of hope. I think it's just like a just sort of beneficial thing to us. It's inherent. It's like essential to human flourishing. We want to be surrounded by beauty. We deserve to be surrounded by beauty. And I think if the goal was to live in a world where more people had more access to more beauty, like what a wonderful thing that would be. And it seems like we're sort of living in the opposite of that right now. We're seeing the destruction of the climate, the destruction of, you know, healthcare in the US, I mean, everywhere.
Yeah.
So it's just like, it seems to me if we prioritize this other sort of radical experience of beauty as a guiding light rather than our own physical appearance, it could radically change the world.
So the beauty or appearance industry, as you like to term it, does often sort of note or capitalize on this notion of attraction. So what is that to you, and how is that different to beauty? Yeah,
I mean, I think attraction is so different than beauty. the big thing that I like to bring up in conversations of attraction and desire is the skin microbiome, which is like a little sciencey and out there, but bear with me. So, you know, we're covered in like 1 trillion bacteria. The skin microbiome is covered in bacteria and viruses and all of these things that make like the ecosystem that lives on our skin and is part of our health, also connects us to the outside world. We get a lot of these bacteria from plants, from animals, from, you know, pets. If you have siblings, you have a more diverse microbiome. But anyway, these little bugs, these microorganisms create chemical reactions, and their chemical reactions react with other people's chemical reactions. And this is something that we refer to as chemistry. It's involved in like pheromones and in sort of that like instinctual animal attraction. Whether sexual or familial or whatever, the reason you're drawn to somebody does have something to do with the microorganisms living on your body. And skincare, industrialized skincare really decimates the microbiome. It really just disrupts all of its functions. People who use more soaps and more skincare have less diverse microbiomes. And I just feel like there are so many little ways like that the beauty industry is at odds with just what the human body is meant to do that we don't necessarily think about. Like the attraction versus beauty thing is so focused on particular features, but there's so much more going on that we don't even know about, that the science isn't even fully there on, that goes into it. Another thing that I like to bring up is micro expressions. So part of connecting with another person and having that like really deep connection is, you know, we all make micro expressions when we talk. And part of connection is that the other person will reflect those micro expressions back at you with things like Botox, you know, anti-aging neurotoxins and fillers. We're limiting the micro expressions that we can express and reflect. And I really do think it probably has some sort of impact on, I mean, it's studied that it has an impact on our empathy levels. I suspect it also has an impact on attraction, connection, romance, and these are all parts of the beauty industry I would love to see studied more in depth, because I do think they have like measurable impact on other parts of our lives.
In another recent interview, you argued that we should overhaul patriarchy because it's at odds with women.
Yeah. Just a casual idea I came up with.
Just a little thing that we should probably do. How do you propose that we do this within the context of the beauty industry, but broader? So I know that you're talking about this sort of collectivism, but practically, obviously, women for decades, hundreds of years have been attempting to do so. And it has been, you know, consistently not so effective. So how do you suppose that we do this?
I mean, that's a great question. I wish I had the answer. We wouldn't be here right now debating it if I did. I think like everybody has their different roles, right? And I feel like my role is to bring awareness to some of these issues so that hopefully somebody with more expertise in a different field than I can take that thought, consider it, run with it, and apply their skill set to it. So, I mean, I hope I see that. I think one start, which isn't, you know, particularly new or radical, is just starting to shift our value system. I think a lot of people see beauty as women's sole pathway to power. The more beautiful you are, the more access you have to certain systems. And in some ways that can be beneficial, I guess, for an individual or for a few women. But I think collectively abiding by those patriarchal values only perpetuates them. So I think we need to stop seeing it as feminist to gain power within a patriarchal system, and start considering, okay, what are some other ways to build power outside of that system?
Yeah. We've also seen like women in the UK, it's been argued that within the like UK political system, they take on sort of masculine traits in order to gain power as well. So you have sort of the pretty privilege, but you also have sort of a pull to sort of masculinate yourself in order to sort of fit in with the boys' club. So there's no winning.
There really is no winning. And when people say that to me, which I get all of the time, which is like, even if, you know, I divest from the beauty industry or whether I give into the beauty industry, it's the same. I'm still getting discriminated against as a woman, so why can't I just not do the thing that makes me feel good? And my answer is always, well, if it's damned if you do, damned if you don't, why wouldn't you choose the path of not perpetuating the patriarchal value of standardized beauty and doing, being a part of that? Because if you're screwed either way, you might as well do something a little bit more radical.
So we're going to move on to your Substack.
Sure.
Now. So obviously Substack has grown quite quickly, and it's been taken on by writers and journalists as sort of a bastion of hope against the publishing industry. What would you say about that? Do you think it's as hopeful as it pretends to be?
I do think it's hopeful. I do think that there is just something really rewarding and exciting about, for instance, I no longer have to work for these corporations that my values don't really align with them. I had been writing for big beauty magazines in the past and really trying to get these sort of more controversial articles placed and not having a lot of luck. So I was compromising on what I was creating things I didn't really believe in, and then I was being paid by a corporation whose values didn't align with mine. And now with my newsletter, it feels really good to know that I can do this work based on micro payments from people whose values do align with mine. It really does feel like this collective effort, and it's something that I definitely try to pay forward with other creators through subscribing to theirs, because I do think that's part of how we can build power is, maybe stop doing your $2 a month to Vogue subscription, like maybe not your Condé Nast, and support an independent creator who is not beholden to the same sorts of like political issues that like a Condé Nast is, the advertisers, the affiliate links, things like that. So I do think there are elements of it that are really hopeful. Of course, Substack is a corporation too, so I don't want to go too hard and say this is the future and there's absolutely nothing wrong with anything that they're doing and never will be. But I do think like on a broader level, like the newsletter format is really hopeful for me.
And also I think if I was to say about it as well, I think that it helps to push against grand narratives, like you're saying, because of that independence that it gives you. Because I was also going to ask how you squared sort of working and writing for magazines and companies that also do push sort of narratives that you work against.
Yeah.
How have you, now that you have your newsletter, it's easier, but in the past, how did you feel about that?
In the beginning, it was sort of just like, this is how it is. There are certain compromises you're going to have to make if you have a certain goal in mind. And that's still the advice that I give to younger journalists who come to me and say, what should I do? I don't believe in this thing. I do think there is, the same with beauty, the same way that I'm wearing a little bit of concealer because I'm on camera right now. There are certain concessions we're always going to have to make because we live within these larger systems that it's really not easy to push back on them all of the time. So I had that in mind. Like I knew there were certain compromises I was going to have to make in service to a larger goal. So that was part of it. And then I always feel like a little corny saying it, but when I branched out on my own and was doing a mix of my own writing from the newsletter and journalism for other outlets, I created sort of a mission statement for myself. So my mission statement was to change beauty culture on a mass scale. And so whatever opportunity would get me closer to that mission statement, if I had the opportunity to do something sort of boundary pushing in a Vogue, in the New York Times, I was going to take that opportunity because it could get, more eyeballs on my work, more people realizing that there's perhaps another way to think about beauty. And I saw that, as in service to like this larger goal that I had for myself and my work.
Okay. So what has been your most rewarding thing as a culture critic? What's been the best moment so far?
That's such a good question. I haven't really thought about this, but I got one email from a reader who thanked me for the work that I do and shared this story about, sorry, I'm gonna cry.
Oh, it's okay.
She shared this story about like her mother having cancer. My own mother has cancer.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
And she like wanted to spend time with her mother, and she was like, we can focus on skincare because chemo is doing awful things to your skin. And she said there was like these really kind of tense couple of weeks with her mother where her mother was like, I don't care about this. And her daughter was like, this is something we can share. It's empowering. It's fun. And after finding my newsletter and reading more about like the skincare industry and the standards it perpetuates and how it's like really not this like collective fun community thing, the light bulb sort of went off, and she said like, thank you for putting that out there so I could spend my mother's like final moments with her and like not care about this.
Jessica, thank you so much for this.
Thank you so much for having me.